This right here is the county's general fund bottom line.
Okay.
And everything leading up to it is all of the departments that make up the general fund. So you've got unassigned. I mean, these are accounts that we use to pay bills, pay payroll, stuff like that, and HR-related expenses. Then you get into the commissioner's budget, auditor's budget, treasurer's budget. I mean, all of these are elected officials' offices and agencies that are contained within the general fund. And so when we talk about the general fund, this is that bundle of offices that make up county government.
Okay.
Beyond that, you get into what are called special revenue funds, and these are for like a specific purpose. So, for example, the dog warden's fund, that's a county agency.
Instead of elected official.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it, but it's kind of outside of the how should I say it? Like the general fund is funded by primarily the taxes that Ross County collects. So like sales tax, property tax, we get casino tax revenue from the state, for example. When you get into the special revenue funds, typically you're talking about either entities that are funded by their own levies or that are heavily funded by fees. And so they're kind of outside of the general fund in terms of what the county collects.
Okay, so they sort of collect their own money for their own purposes and not a more general
Yes.
fund for general purposes.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
So when you think general fund, think county taxes and whatever state revenue that comes to the county for general purposes. Okay? So when we talk about passing the general fund budget, what we're talking about is that collection of departments that are funded by those means. Okay?
Okay. I know when I ask at city council, what's the number for the city's budget, and it's
Right.
always more complicated than
Right.
it's not a single number.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So the general fund is, generally speaking, what we talk about when we talk about county government, is the way to look at that.
So for the county, the general fund is rounding off $35.2
$35.2.
million.
Yep.
And then the additional offices are another.
Well, it really adds up.
Is there a total for those?
Well,
It looks like the grand total is $107 million.
yeah. But I'll give you an example. See if we can find one here. So this is the engineers special revenue fund, and so what you'll see is that there's a portion of the engineer's office that is funded within the general fund. Most of that is with Charlie's compensation himself. So like Charlie's benefits, for example.
Meaning the funds that go directly to him for his use.
Well, yeah, so like Charlie's salary is paid from the general fund. His retirement is paid from the general fund. His insurance and benefits are paid from the general fund. There's some supplies and equipment that are funded by the general fund. We receive a portion of the state sales tax via the general fund that's then distributed to townships. Charlie's general fund portion of the budget is $408,000. But then when you get into his special revenue funds, motor vehicle and gas tax, so these are distributions that we get from the state, these don't come to us for the purpose of funding county government. These come to us for the purpose of building and maintaining roads in Ross County. So that's outside the general fund because of its source and how it's used. But there we're talking about nearly $8 million. So if Charlie's $8.5 million or whatever it is that he's budgeted for this year, 8 of it comes from special revenue outside of the county's general fund.
Okay.
See what I mean?
Yeah. So
So-
you gotta keep track of every single penny and to be accountable to where the funds come from and where they go to.
Yeah, so when we get money from the state, a lot of times there are strings attached that kind of restrict how we're able to use it. It's not like we get it and we can do whatever we want with it. It comes to us for a specific purpose. So anything that we get related to motor vehicle or gas tax, it's dedicated for specific purposes, and so that's in part why it's kept separate. But my point in saying that is that it's, when you really get into the thick of all of this, there's a lot more to it than just we have a budget of X. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that's why when we talk about the general fund, it's these are the essential and necessary functions of county government as it's constituted, and then all of the rest of it, if it's funded by other means, that's kept separate because it has to be spent in certain ways.
Yeah.
So,
But for big picture,
mm-hmm.
the general fund is, where's page 10?
Yeah,
35.2 million.
this is what's most germane to what takes place here. You know what I mean?
But also grand total, big overall grand total, $107.8 million.
So that's
What this county is spending, grand total on all things.
you could think of that as like that's the total amount that will flow through county government, but it doesn't all originate here because a lot of that comes from the state, a lot of it comes from outside levies.
So that's 107. That's what, 75%. Math is not my forte.
Yeah, you're roughly
35
right. Yeah.
million out of 107 million.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of that comes from the state.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So how does this compare to previous years?
Well, so that $35.2 million budget, we just got the final figure on it. So what's happened in years past in Ross County is that a budget's been passed, and over the course of the year, appropriations have been increased. And so what you end up with at the end of the year is like a final budget figure. Okay, so last year, for example, and I had this right here because I was wanting to compare them, we started out with a budget of $31.6 million that was passed for 2023. We're going to end up with a budget of a little over $33 million. And so that's been kind of the trend. And I think that's pretty typical because what happens is you pass the initial plan, over the course of the year stuff comes up and adjustments have to be made. So that's pretty common.
And it's always a guesstimate. Prices will rise, situations will happen.
Well, prices will rise, stuff will happen. You'll also have opportunities that come up. And so you want to be able to capitalize on opportunities if they come up. And so for whatever reason, over the course of a year, appropriations are increased to accommodate for those kind of things. One of the things that we've talked a lot about is trying to shift that focus to say, let's try to work within the budget that we're passing so that when changes need to be made, we can make those changes internally via transfers versus appropriation increases. And let's really try to govern to this figure,
Transfers versus appropriations.
So an appropriation increase is when you have a budget of $100, let's say, and you increase it to $120 to accommodate whatever you have to do or whatever you choose to do. Whereas a transfer, let's say you have $100 in a line in the budget and you have a $120 need. Well, via a transfer, you can find money in another line that can be moved internally without increasing the overall size of the budget.
Okay, but you can enlarge the size of the budget only so far, then you run out of money, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible to appropriate beyond your ability, but we're not in any danger of that in Ross County. Ross County is doing very well financially, but the way to keep it that way is to say, okay, we want to work within the budget. And so let's say you have two lines, and one is $100 appropriation, the other is $100 appropriation, $200 appropriations, but in one of them you end up having a $120 need.
So you take from
That's right.
Rob and Peter to pay Paul.
In theory, yeah, but that has kind of a negative connotation.
True.
I'd characterize it more as like resource allocation. So if you only have an $80 need here and you have a $120 need over here, well, the easy way to solve that problem is to say, okay, we can adjust via a transfer rather than to increase this appropriation.
Money's not being used here, it's needed here, so you can...
That's right, yeah. And so that'll be a focus this year to the best of our ability. Because, the budget's passed, it's there. We know that it's not going to end up being what it is today because that's just the nature of things. You know what I mean? It's really hard to say exactly what we're going to spend money on over the next 12 months. But
it's all an educated guess.
Yeah, so you make projections. You estimate what revenue is going to come in. You estimate what expenses. Hey, Devin, you estimate what expenses you'll have, and so you project it. But then I think the idea is over the course of the year, you govern to that document to the best of your ability. The easy thing is to say, well, we'll just increase the budget, but that's where spending growth comes from. If you have a budget and you focus on transfers instead of just increasing appropriations, you're kind of self-imposing the kind of discipline that'll keep the budget on track year over year over year.
So is the flow of money sort of normalized after the previous few years with COVID and everything?
Well, so the commissioners have done a really good job of keeping those funds separate. They have, and I can show you in this document, this is the fund summary. So one thing that the commissioners did when all of the federal ARPA money came in was that they set it up in a separate account. And so this start, I think, is around a $14 million line. They've spent a lot of the ARPA money, but they've held back, as you can see, $10.6 million approximately. And so this money has been kept outside of the general fund because, number one, there are strings attached with how we spend it and how we track it and have to report it to the federal government. But number two, the commissioners were really smart, I think, to not want to just fritter it away because that would have been probably pretty easy to do. You get a $14 million lump sum and it's like everyone has ideas on what to do with it.
Yeah,
you know
so
what I
you
mean?
sequester it in a separate bank account to try to hide it from yourself. So you...
Well, yeah, so it's all under the county's supervision, of course, but by keeping it separate, what the commissioners have done has been really intentional about, hey, we're going to consider ways to use this. We'll use it when the time is right, when we know exactly what we want to do with it. And we're in a position now where we've got $10.6 million set aside that's separate from the general fund that's still usable for whatever purposes they decide on.
But would you say things are sort of normal? You don't expect massive inflation or all the bridges to fall into the creeks or anything?
Yeah.
Any high strangeness this year?
No, I mean, it's, all you can do is project to the best of your ability. But as far as what we see here in Ross County, we are cash rich. We know what we want to spend on this year, at least for the time being. There might be opportunities that come up. There might be challenges that come up. But if those come up, we have the ability to address those in this budget because of the county's strong financial position. And when you think about just the general economy, we've experienced high inflation over the last few years, but that seems to have kind of moderated at least. The question is, how do we deal with the higher baseline of costs versus where we were 3 years ago, for example?
Yeah.
I don't see costs going back down. I see costs flattening, at least based on what we see now. But what that means is that we have a new baseline. And so, you kind of spend in a disciplined way, knowing that things could change. And because of that, and because of the way business has been done here in Ross County in years past, we're going to have the ability to do whatever we might need to do in 2024.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how long did it take to go through all these numbers and formulate this plan?
Yeah, well, it started over the summer. It's in June. We get initial requests from all of the agencies and departments.
And does the county need to do a tax budget in midsummer like the city does?
Yeah. So it's really over the course of about 7 months that we do this. But we receive all the requests. We make our projections. We kind of digest it, analyze, continue to track. And then it was in November that we got back for kind of the second round of sit downs with all the elected officials and agencies and departments and said, okay, here's what you requested. Are any changes needed? We made changes as they were requested in that second round. And then for our part here in the auditor's office, working with the commissioners, it was a matter of once we had gone through that second inspection of requests, then it was time to trim. We started with 36.7 million in requests. The commissioners knew they didn't want to spend that much, and I applauded them for that because I knew I didn't want to see that happen. So we worked together with the commissioners to identify opportunities to cut, and when the time came, we would communicate with the other elected officials and say, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And we were able to cut. I think it ended up being like 1.7 million out of it to produce a balanced budget. We don't project to spend more than we'll take in next year, so that's good. That's a truly balanced budget.
You want a ideal carryover from year to year, not too big, not too small.
Well, not so much that you have a dollar figure in mind. The biggest thing is just to make sure that you don't plan to spend more than you'll take in.
Yeah.
Right? So the first job and the first responsibility is to make sure that we're matching expenses to revenue. And then when we're able, try to produce a surplus. This budget, we're going to carry over $17.7 million in cash in the general fund from 23 to 24.
That sounds like a lot. That's
it
half
is a
of
lot.
what you're.
It's huge. Yeah, it's huge. Ross County financially is about as strong as it probably ever has been, at least in a generation, I'd say.
Even after the COVID years.
Yeah, and what's really remarkable about it is that, I was mentioning earlier that Ross County has kept the COVID funds separate. That $17.7 million cash carryover in the general fund does not include ARPA dollars, which is that additional $10.6 million I was talking about. So Ross County's, on one hand fortunate, but on the other hand, it's really been kind of intentional. The commissioners have been very good about fiscal discipline, and that's to their credit. But now it's our job to maintain that. So we start 2024 from a very strong position, and we will maintain it by continuing to watch what we spend on and spending wisely, and just kind of address what comes as it does.
All right. So if anyone wants to learn more or be in contact with your office, how can they do that?
Yeah, so we posted PDFs, both of the budget summary and the appropriations on the auditor's website, auditor.rosscountyohio.gov. Send me an email, Jeff Lehner at rosscountyohio.gov, or call the office, 740-702-3080. And I know the commissioners would be happy to answer questions too. You got to contact them separate from our office. But just everything we can do to make it transparent and accessible and make sure that people know what they want to know about what we're doing with their money.